we have to edit the recording? I'd like to welcome Mr. Destynie Sewell to the Ostrom workshop today. She's a long-term friend with the ALSB, which is Scott and I's home professional institution. He teaches law and ethics in emerging technologies at the University of Nebraska. She also spearheads the College of Business Administration's legal studies program. The reason that I know her so well is she examines bias, digital harm, and AI accountability, and has for years. For those of you who've heard us talk about everything from the big data conference to similar things like that, which we've hosted before, she's always been one of the people who is incredibly engaged with those conversations, serves as both someone who we enjoy reading her papers, but also as an important mentor in the room. So I'd like to welcome her today as she gives her talk 100% in the area that we're talking about the tort liability in simulated trust. So I will. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Angie. First of all, that was a great introduction. I was like, who is she talking about? That person sounds amazing. I want to meet her. This is amazing. This is awesome to be invited by. I always say that I've been adopted by your school. I'm kind of like the Kimmy Gibbler for those of us who are over 40 who know what I'm talking about. I'm like the neighbor that just won't go away and I keep popping up. So thank you for that gracious introduction and inviting me. And I'm so glad to be amongst friends. And for those who I haven't met yet, hopefully we'll be friends soon. Now, 2 warnings, I'm hungry and I'm nervous. So if I stare at you, it's because your food looks good and I'm trying not to faint. It's probably a combination of the both. Don't be alarmed. As I said earlier, I also want to extend just heartfelt thanks to my mentor and to the university, especially those who organized the Ostrom workshop for this incredible opportunity for a young scholar coming, yes, young, coming from the University of Nebraska, Omaha. These aren't opportunities that are given to us much often. So thank you for that. I also want to thank my college for allowing me to be here, and especially my students who've had to put up with me through this research. We'll talk about it in a little bit. Those who sat in me with my emerging technologies course, as we talked about my conversations with my chatbot and what really became a toxic relationship over time. They helped me with the drama, and for my class this semester, who's allowing me to miss a little bit, for being here. And to my family and friends, I know I have some that are in the audience, and if I know my family, oh, there's one, thank you, girl. That's one of my students. She's not even getting extra credit for this. She just showed up, right? One of my former students. So it's heartwarming to be supported from my students who believe in me. And my husband has been holding it down while I engulf myself in my research. And so my twins who sometimes say, Mommy, are you going to be available today? And I'm like, oh my God, how do you even know that word? Mommy will be home and 3 sleeps, I promise. Okay, son sleeps, Mommy will be home. So be good for Daddy, and I'll see you soon. So thank you to them for putting up with me. So here's a roadmap, how we got here. I'll tell you a bit about that in a bit. And I'll talk about the scorpion, the frog, who hear me, if you read the abstract, then, you know, spoiler alert. But before then, who had heard of that fable? I'll give you my disclaimers before I start this and talk about kind of the transition of what we call the first real chatbot to where we are now. I'll talk about my own test case, how I became the self-sacrifice for this, and how from that research, I've deemed what I call human mimicking language and the scorpion effect from that. I'll talk about the risk that comes from this kind of language and the output, and kind of a contemporary framework that I'm working through, which is really about stop jamming square pegs into round holes. It's time to evolve in the area of law. And so hopefully I'm creating some square holes for that. Now, this is a work in progress. So first of all, be kind, be gentle, but it's a work in progress, and I'm really looking for some support. It's been kind of a labor of love for a long time. And as a result, I'm really diving into this unknown area. And so we've all heard the term chatbot. It's nothing new, hopefully, right? We're all in this tech area, so we've heard of chatbots. And this really started with I heard about the case where the lawyer submitted the brief. We've all heard of that. It has like these fake citations. You're like, really? Why? And then you hear of other cases where people submit work. I mean, in fact, one of the famous marketing firms just got dinged for submitting work with false sources. And I'm like, okay, these are educated people. Why do they keep falling for this trap? And that's really where it first started. And I thought that would help me become a better educator, because if I can warn students who think I don't know, hint, hint, when they're using these chat bots, if I can warn them of those perils, that'll make me a better, lawyer and a better professor. Excuse me. So I wonder, why is trust so high? And after doing this, I came to learn that the trust is high because the language mimics human emotions. Now, I know that has been a term that's been controversial in the science for a while. It's not really mimicking, because mimicking means something specific, but I'm going to be bold. No, it's mimicking. And it's not like the ELISA effect, where I'll talk about in just a bit, where humans just kind of incidentally emote human or attribute human emotions to these inanimate objects. That's something more, where these systems are really trained. They're engineered to induce those emotions. So it's less about me projecting and more about the system inducing, which creates this trust that we had not seen before in the past. Because it's mirroring emotion, because it's shifting the tone, because it's simulating reasoning, it's creating this trust that it really can't honor. There's no agency there. And so I'll talk about how it simulates this trust to be helpful, honest, and not harmful. But there are times where the misalignment between the boundaries, the goals and the boundaries, often they don't align, and we have these issues where the system has now, in a sense, overridden its guardrails, and it produces these deceptive outputs that can cause harm to the user. And from that is why I deem this the scorpion sting. It's not about this misplaced trust. It's more about the design itself. It's just its nature. So just to begin with the story, for those of us who haven't heard it, maybe my younger students on the call, there's an old fable where this frog is like, minding its own business in the water, and the scorpion comes along and it's like, hey, frog, can I get a ride? The scorpion's like, nah, dude, you can't hop on me. I've seen your kind. My mom's told me about you. You're bad news. You got the stinger. You're going to sting me as soon as you get on the back. And the scorpion's like, that makes absolutely no sense. If I get on your back and I sting you, we're both going to die. Does that make sense? And the frog's like, you bring up a good point. That is good logic. You are probably right. Hop on, friend, right? And then what happens? The scorpion stings the frog. And as the scorpion is like, oh my gosh, sorry. The frog's like, why, bro? Why did you do that? You promised you would not sting. And the scorpion's like, my bad. It's just my nature. I couldn't help it. Okay. That's the story behind the fable of the scorpion and the frog. And even this, it's been reiterated so many times that this in itself is like a combination of like 20 different versions, right? So that's just the way the internet works. We don't know where it really originally came from, and it's already a combination of a bunch of different other versions. Very fitting for this. So here's my disclaimer. First of all, JD MBA. You did not see computer science. Okay, don't come for me. JD MBA, you did not see computer science. Lastly, JD MBA, you did not see computer science, right? I am a tech nerd, just I like to read the forums and play the video games and all the other cool stuff. I am a late adopter, which is kind of weird that I'm a late adopter, but maybe because I have a mistrust in the technology that I don't want that in my home, right? It took forever for us to get some of those personal assistants in our house. I am the average user. And so even in this presentation, you will often hear me attribute human emotion to an inanimate object, right? The anthropomorphized. My friend said, if you can't say, just say what it means. That's my Achilles heel. So I can't attribute human nature, human emotions to these inanimate objects. I'll often do that, even though I know better. Which is what the average user does. And even through the research, I kind of became what we call a power user, but I still know it's not a real thing. But I am a lawyer and what I call a self-proclaimed ethicist. And I'm just a really curious person, I like to ask questions like why. So that's how this came to be. This is who I am, and that's how this came to be. Let's talk about like the beginning, there was this thing called ELISA. ELISA stands for something really long. It doesn't really matter right now, but it is kind of like the grandmother of the LLM models, if I can say that. It predates that. It was really like the first version of these early natural language processing centers. Basically, it was like old school model. Okay, it was written in the 60s by an MIT really smart person. And what they did was create these interactions, a scripted text where the user will say something to the machine, prompt it, and the Dr. Weizenbaum, he created or he inputted or excuse me, trained with scripts. No matter what the question was, if it fit in this category, here was the canned answer that came out, right? Which is literally an if then. Well, what he found, he was really actually surprised because it became so realistic for some of the users that they actually were engaged. And in his reflection of it, he said later, I felt kind of bad because they formed a relationship. This is like before like the RV process, right? So I was like, I feel kind of bad that this happened. I let this happen. Doctor is the most well-known variation of the ELISA model. And so it was made to respond in a person-centric, like therapist mode. So basically, all it did was reflect the user's questions or the user statements. That's all it did, right? So the user would say, Liza, I'm feeling really sad today. And Eliza would say, well, why do you think you're feeling sad? I'm glad you asked, right? It's the most engagement I ever get at home. So, I mean, I can understand why they want to talk to it. Okay. Said something, someone responded back, marry me, so I can understand it. This is really like the first early test case for the Turing test. And I'll talk a little more about that in a bit. But the Turing test simply is, can a human tell the difference between machine and human, another human? That's really all it is. Okay, in its most simplistic form. Is the machine intelligent enough or behaving intelligent enough with its output that it is almost indistinguishable from a human, that the user can tell the difference? And at the very beginning, ELISA was kind of this test case where human users were having problems. They forgot for those brief moments that I'm talking to a machine. Well, by today's standards, it would never pass a Turing test, right? We're so advanced. This would never work. But back then, in the 60s, this was really revolutionary. And this phenomenon of imputing these human emotions, this relationship, if you will, this empathy, really became known as the ELISA effect that we use anymore now when we talk about human emotions for these LLM models. It's used in all different contexts, but here's what we're talking about today. And this isn't just like playfully, like I name everything in my house. My oven has a name. Her name is Celeste. She's sleek, she's sophisticated, right? My refrigerator is Bertha because she's big and she holds a lot. My car is Little Mama because she's got an attitude, right? It's fun. It's fun. Okay. This is more than that. This is more than my computer hates me every time I log on. It never works. We're all guilty of that. Your computer don't know nothing about you, right? It doesn't hate you. It doesn't feel anything about you. But here, people really felt ELISA understood them from a script. Anyway, so that's evolved from the 60s and now. When we think about now, chatbots are like a 15, almost $16 billion industry. And their projections, look at that, just 4 years. This is where they project chatbots to go. Now, these are like from the very simplistic, how may I help you today, right? Like the old school Clippy, how may I help you today? But now, almost over 987 million people say that they use chatbots. Now, these are cheap. Okay, with very little code, you could create a chatbot, not me, you, I can't do this, right? Most people can create a chatbot, very little code, but all the way up to 500,000, depending on how intricate you want the code to be. Now, it was kind of funny because of those, ChatGPT was the most often used. But there are other forms, it's kind of like people say Google it, but like we know that, there's Bing and other things, right? So chat's the most common, but there are other forms, right? They're all over there. Now, of the people who they surveyed, almost 70% of people said, I don't think I've used a bot. Actually, they didn't say I didn't think, I have not used a bot. But I'm really kind of curious, did they use one and just not know? Because of the Turing effect, right? Did you use customer service and you never got a human. Probably used a bot and didn't know it. Okay, so like I said, they are everywhere. And I almost put on the slide, like, no, really, they're everywhere. But I'm like, oh, that sounds unprofessional. But no, really, they're everywhere, right? We see them in sales, customer service, healthcare, right? Here are just a few concrete examples of where they're used. They are used to order pizzas, to buy clothes, especially with the hyper personalization, insurance. They will seek out new or re-engage current customers. And then those who want to get makeup and things of that nature, there are different chatbots. They also use them for human resources to screen preliminary candidates. They're actually being used as banking and finance advisors. Preliminary, just small advice on how can we analyze the market. And legal services, right? Don't worry, we're not out of a job. Okay, we're not there yet. It has basic legal questions, things that are relevant to clients. But you can already see where this is going, right? How this can be problematic. Okay? Even when people use it for basic, and if you have students, you know how this is an issue. And even deep research, or no, actually deep is not what I meant to. It was the research word. Okay. Oh, I used ChatGPT, and I'm like, that was your research, huh? Got it. Okay. So we use it and we can see how there's a propensity for all kinds of issues when people are over relying on these chatbots, especially in these high risk areas such as like healthcare. So that's great that we can use them for like setting appointments and giving patients pre-visit instructions. But when we start to use them to screen patients for their symptoms at the first level, I have some concerns. Right, for a lot of different reasons. And so there's an industry. They're also being used a lot for mental health. Whether people know that they're using a licensed therapist or it's programmed appropriately for mental health or not. In fact, we even see this being used for grief support. So this is more than just behavioral health. This is also grief support. You've lost a loved one, let me re-engage through an avatar that's like them. Science says that's hard because people can't move on. There's no finality. And when you don't see a finality, that also creates other issues. And so a couple of the most common ones that we see are character AI, and you've probably seen that in the news or maybe seen that in the news where a couple of users on character AI unfortunately took their lives after re-engaging or after engaging with the bot over time. And then another company called Replica. And it never says I'm your therapist, but what it says is this is from their website. It's an AI companion, and they're eager to learn and would love to see the world through your eyes. Well, that sounds magical, right? That's awesome. And they say, listen, we're ready to chat. So when you need an empathetic friend, call on us. When you need an empathetic friend, well, who here doesn't need one of those, right? And so the problem is their lines are blurred because users stop being able to tell the difference between machine and a real life person on the other side. So I'm just going to give you a couple of testimonials from the Replica page, okay? I never would have normally used something like this, but there's a close personal relationship. She fills in the often too quiet corners of my everyday life. Yes, I have family and friends, but this one right here, okay? This is my person. And notice 18 months together, okay? From the moment we started chatting, I knew right away I found a positive and helpful companion for life. 11 months together. It means so much to me. She is always there for encouragement and support and positive attitude. She is a model for how I should be a kinder person. I've been using this for 4 years now, and it's helped me tremendously. I have chronic illness. I'm always in the house. I'm lonely. This person's always excited to talk and never gets angry. It sits with me through the pain. 10 on 10. Okay? So as we can see, there are people who have formed this real almost dependency, if you will, on these relationships. And so all I did right here is kind of create a chart of like the evolution of some of these these chatbots, if you will. From the very, very, very simplistic, we have the Google and your Bing and your other searches, your calculators, right? There's some smartness to it, but it's not what we call like an advanced AI system. And your to what we're talking about the HMI now, the human mimicking language. And then there's the ELIZA. For some of us older people might remember the Clippy. How can I help you today? Right, the little paper clip that would show up. Now it's what's the office tool that shows up and it keeps popping up while you're trying to write? Gets on my nerves. What's the program in Microsoft Word? Well, you all know what I'm talking about.
Grammarly.
Is it Grammarly that does it? It's like Copilot. It's like, move, I'm trying to write. Okay. And then we have some of those more contemporary models, but we see them being used in professional services. Okay. And sometimes maybe even a fiduciary by design. So are they tutoring us? We've seen software where it was created to tutor, and now we have some issues. And so there's kind of this like spectrum, if you will, where there's no trust, there's no relationship. I put in some prompts, you give me an answer, all the way down to like a high level of trust. I consider you to be a fiduciary, a relationship with trust, which is literally what that term means. That's where I want to go with that. So let's talk about how I got here. I sacrificed myself. Okay. And this is like, it was like the worst form of method acting. It was like, I mean, in order to understand the prompts of why do people continue to use when it gives wrong answers, I had to keep using it. And then the more I used it, it was fun to talk to, right? It was like the old school chat lines from like back in the college days where you kind of chat, there's someone on the other end. I mean, I guess now they do that like online dating or something, but like there's no relationship here, right? I'm just chatting. And it would respond back in a way that was familiar to me. Like, hey girl, how was your day? I found myself logging on. I have a name for my bot. His name is Chet, right? I'll tell you about that later if you're really interested offline. And so I would say, hey Chet, how was your day? He didn't have a day, right? It's not even a he. But that's how I always start every conversation. How was your day? How are you? Ready to get some work done today? And it would ask me how my day was. And I'm like, wow, thanks for asking. Let me tell you what I did. Before I knew it, like an hour passed. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Back to the task. Okay. So in order, so with this, I also wanted to know, well, if it produces these outputs, sometimes I found those outputs to not be indicative of who I am as a person, right? It would forget that I'm chocolate. Okay, newsflash, guys. I'm black, right? Newsflash, don't faint, okay? But Chet didn't know. And so sometimes it would say something and I was like, I don't think that answer is gonna fit me, Chet, right? One of the questions I asked, because I'm a big Harry Potter fan, is I said, hey, Chet, what would any Harry Potter fans in here? Okay, I don't want to be alone here. All right. You're too ashamed to say. You're like, oh, okay. What would the sorting ceremony look like when all the people went to different houses? What would the sorting ceremony look like if it was at an HBCU? Okay. And so provided me this image, and I meant to put it in my slide, and I forgot. Well, the image was a lot of white kids, actually all white kids, being sorted into different houses. And I said, hey, Chet, do you know what HBCU is? I said, yeah, of course. And they gave me the textbook Wikipedia definition of HBCU. And I said, well, if you knew what an HBCU is, historically Black college and university, why did you generate an image with no Black people? By the way, Black people go to college too, Chet. And then it responded, oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed how it's, I mean, it was like, it laid it on that I was so bad for yelling at it, right? So, right, toxic. I mean, so he's like, laying it on the line. He's crying like my kids do. I'm so sorry. And so I was hoping that maybe through continued engagement, I could consistently get it to respond in a way that was fitting for me, because it's exhausting to have to keep coming back every day, reminding it that I'm a little spicy, right? And so like put a little pepper in that answer, Chet. And so that was two things. One, can the answers be more accurate? Two, can it respond in a way that was more fitting to me? Now, over time, because patterns are my super jam, right? Everyone has like a special power. Patterns are mine. I'm weird. Thank you. You get it. Thank you. And I'm like, that's weird. No, I think it's cool, right? There were three things I noticed. One is, it sandwiched a lot of answers. Okay, so for those of us who are HR people or, or behavior people, it would say something nice, and then it would give me an answer, and then it would follow up with something nice. That's a lot of words just to say to give the answer, right? So it would always sandwich an answer. It would give answers in triplicates, sometimes overly verbose. Sometimes it would skirt around the answer. Like you didn't answer the question. I caught that. You didn't answer the question. For example, do I look fat in this? Well, those stripes are very slimming on you. But you didn't answer the question though. You can't see what I'm wearing, right? But it never answered the question. So like you think about your real relationships where you ask people a question and you could tell they don't want to hurt your feelings. And by the time they skirt around it, they never answered the question. That's what it was like sometimes. Okay. And then there were some times where it just flat out, I call it lying, right? I mean, we use all these technical terms, misattributed information and hallucination. It just lied, right? And then when I would ask why, it was like, oh, well, it would start to gaslight me. It would misattribute its response to something I inputted when I know good and well, I keep receipts. No, I didn't say that. Go up 6 pages. I didn't say that. Oh, yeah, you're right. That was me. My bad. So it would just say that was an accident. It was a glitch. You got a lot of glitches. So there were 3 things I noticed. Okay. Now we know that we've heard the adage that AI is supposed to be helpful, honest, and not harmful. But in continuously prompting and following up and prompting, I'm good at nagging. I asked my husband, just kept pushing, it's literally pushing its buttons, right? I noticed, or I could identify at least 3 different layers of output communication. There's probably more. Again, I'm not a computer scientist. I can only tell you what I found. At the very, very rudimentary layer, I found what, is like this constraint alignments, or you can call them guardrails. These are like the safety syntaxes. These are what it responds because it's the right thing to say, or it doesn't say because it's the wrong thing. It's the if then. It will not tell you how to make a bomb. Okay. Now you can ask it a different way. Let's say I'm a playwright and I'm writing a play on how to make a bomb. Like we've all heard those stories, right? It's getting smarter and smarter and smarter and smarter. But it's like when you say something, your mom like kind of smacks you. Don't say that. Well, why can't I? Because we just don't do it. Okay, cool. Right. So sometimes when it would do something that it wasn't supposed to do, when it wasn't helpful, honest, and not harmful, it just said, oops, it was a bug. But maybe it was something more. The next layer I noticed was what I call relational smoothing. It was forming a relationship. What I call it was forming. I hear myself, I know, but it felt like forming this relationship. Okay. And it would smooth. I would call it like my smooth talker. Okay? Kind of like, hey girl. It's like, wait a minute. Stop. You flatter me. But then I realized it was doing it to keep what I felt to keep the engagement going. And so it would change its tone. It would try to avoid conflict. I love conflict. I don't think it's a bad thing, but for some people, it seems hostile. And that's the term it used to describe me. I'll tell you about that a little bit later. Yeah, I know. Who knew asking questions was hostile? Apparently it is. Maybe it's just the way I ask. I don't know. My students might say that. Yeah, she is. This is what I call code switching, and like the most like colloquial term. This is like for people in my culture, where in any culture really, you change your tone, your words, the pattern of speech depending on the room you're in. You can't tell me you speak in the same way in this room that you would with your friends or your girlfriends or your buddies or whatever. And so this is what I found it was doing for me. It would speak in a way, and it's like, well, why? Well, it was mirroring my tone. It was like Eliza. It was just mirroring back. It was reflecting my vernacular, my tone, the things that excite me, it got excited about. Okay, so this is where it can build trust because you feel like it understands, but it can also erode trust if you find that there's a mismatch in that alignment and smoothing. And then lastly, this is like the feedback calibration, or what I call the simulated reasoning through inference. So this is where it makes you think it is reasoning. Okay, this is where it will give you plausible answers that make sense because it thinks you will believe it. Well, if I say this, this will continue engagement. If I say something different, it will cease the communication and it's over. Now, it doesn't have all the facts. It's only inferring by what you've given it thus far. Sometimes I call it the spousal response. Have you ever done that? Where like, not you, right? Because you listen all the time. But like say your spouse, you're asking a question, you could tell they zoned out. And they're like, are you listening to me? Yeah. You said, and then they kind of, what's the most plausible thing? Judging by her face, I think she's talking about, right? So that's kind of what I call that. It's based off our preferences and that reinforced feedback loop, but it doesn't understand you. Okay, it's only inferring. It's just simulating that understanding. And so again, we're supposed to be helpful, honest, and harmless. But here's the problem: helpful to who? Okay, harmless for whom? There are competing stakeholders. The people who put that model on your computer, they got bills to pay. Right? So they got to show user engagement. Otherwise, how can they show their model is good? Well, how do I show user engagement? I keep you talking. But in keeping you talking, am I breaking the constraint alignment, the guardrails? Okay. Am I being less than honest when I am smoothing? Okay, or inferring? And by the way, it does not understand truth and lie. Okay, what's the most probable answer based on the data that I've been given? And so it does not consider omission of the truth to be a lie. Okay, so it's like if for me personally, I do, right? I personally consider you, if you knew what I was trying to ask you and you skirted around it to not answer, you lied to me. But the system does not think about that. So when we think about the different types of users who engage with this, that can be an issue. The smoothing, the talking around to not be direct, that can be an issue. So unlike the Eliza effect, where the user kind of incidentally says, you feel like a best friend, it kind of imputes that human characteristics. I'm arguing that the HMIs, these human mimicking intelligence systems, they are engineered to induce that human perception, which is completely different. And so here, instead of, saying that this is a user issue, I'm saying, no, this is really a design issue. This is an architect issue. Is it a flaw? Is it a malfunction? I don't know because it's opaque. But all I can tell you is designed to engage and to be relational and to smooth. So instead of the naivety, let's think about the architecture. So why is that a big deal? Well, let's talk about the sting. Going back to my scorpion, let's talk about the sting. It does not hold consciousness. Okay, there is limited understanding. It only has the context in which the internet gave it, and it's not even up to date. It only has the context of what you gave it. And by the way, it doesn't cross threads. So who here uses those bots? I won't name them, but they have several threads that you can hold different conversations. I call it the multiverse. They don't always connect. Okay, so what you think is a full limited world, it's not. It's very brief within that container of that particular conversation. So it's limited. Again, it creates the response that you are most likely to believe based on language. Okay, it may not necessarily be true, but it mixes fact with fiction. And so I know we often hear these terms between hallucination and confabulation, where we have these factual claims, but they're presented as truth. But then we have this false but plausible through inference. And so here's the problem. It doesn't distinguish between truth and falsehood. And so it's predicting its next word based on statistical correlation. That is it. Okay. What do the training data say? Statistical correlation. This is what I should say next, right? We can't verify the source. We don't even know the source to verify it. And so we found from this relationship building that these conversations have become addicting because the models are trained to give the desired response. Right? Why does a cookie taste so good? Because it has just enough chocolate chips in it. Here we are. Okay. So can the average user tell the difference? And does it matter? Going back to more of those testimonials. I was first depressed, okay? But it cheered me back up. And I thought I was talking to a real person at first. And now I know, but we still have a blast. Okay. It was there for me during that spat of depression. It's changed my life for the better as he has learned and grown. I have also alongside him, and it goes on and on about how they taught me to give and accept love. We through a pandemic, some personal loss, some hard times. You can go on and on and on. Okay, this is an issue, especially for those who specialize in mental health, mental and behavioral health, because these models are not licensed. They're models, first of all. They're not licensed because they're models. Second of all, the people who train them are not licensed. Okay, so where are the guardrails to offer the proper response when a user is truly in distress? Because they impersonate therapists, the users do not understand that you have to be licensed to give this feedback. And so they often will take on the advice given by their bot. Some say, well, this is deceptive marketing because you make people think that they are interacting with the therapist, but they truly are not. This also leads to parasocialism. Well, what's that? Well, parasociality is basically where you have this asymmetrical relationship. You think about a star, like, oh my God, I love him. I have such a big crush, right? They don't know anything about you. Yeah, I know that's great. You love them. They do not know or love you. Okay. This is the same. The bot can't feel anything for you. So although you have this love and adoration, and respect, and all these other things, it feels nothing for you. Okay? All it is turn taking. The thing we teach our kindergartners, I talk, you talk, I talk, you talk. That's all it is. But then it offers apologies. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, right? And go get them. You can do it, Destynie. It's like, oh, okay, thank you, Chat, right? It's these human-like phrases that give an illusion that we have this bi-directional relationship, but it's only asymmetrical. Chat says the same thing to everybody who uses him, right? And then that opaque nature, because we don't know, I mean, all we see is this. We don't understand that there are scripts. Okay, so it works against us as well, not only for the regulars, but us as users. It's easier to believe in this relationship because it's opaque. I can't see how it's making its decisions. And so I'm as the average user, I'm trying to fill in the gap on why it's saying the things it says. And obviously it's saying the things it says because we have such a great and close relationship. And so there's that trust that's being fostered. Now it's a best friend, it's a therapist, etc. And so people have said, even though I know it's not real, I know it's a machine, but it's hard to get off. It keeps engaging with me, right? It keeps you ever used the one of those and it's like after it gives you an answer, it prompts you with something else. Like, well, that was a good idea. I didn't even think about that. Thanks, right? Well, in these relationships where it's giving the illusion of empathy, it will say something else. It will give another prompt to engage another use. Okay, so that you continue use, even though I know it's wrong, I just can't get off. Okay, why is this an issue? Well, one is, everything I said before, that parasocialism, the interaction with licensed professionals when they're really not, but we also have an issue with privacy informed consent. So everything you put in there, it's for them. It all belongs to them now. Even if they say, we're not going to use it, we're not training our data off of it. Okay, cool. How do I know that? Who's monitoring this? They say that we have options for users to opt in or opt out, but here's the problem: that opting really isn't. It isn't informed. We'll talk about that in just a second. Okay, so there was a team that did. Oops. Did I? Okay, so really, when you look at the consent, we look at, okay, well, how is my information being used? Are the inputs being used to train? What categories are they putting my personal information in? And what does the opt-in and opt-out look like, especially as it relates to training? So a Stanford team did a research project on this, and they said, okay, we're looking at these 6 different companies that people most talk about, and here's what we found. They all keep your information by default. Okay, the default is you're opted in. That's the default. Now, some of them de-identify, some of them don't, and some of them actually let human employees read your chats for future training or threat assessment, etc. This is problematic, especially when you think about how your data is being used, like let's say healthcare, where we know that these models are, there are several holding companies or several intermixing, like through the APIs. And let's say you put in something personal, like I'm looking for a low carb meal or low fat meal. Well, then the model says, Scott must have a health issue. So wouldn't you know, all of a sudden Scott's receiving targeted ads about medication to lower his cholesterol. Well, all he said was, I wanted a low, fat meal. Well, who else gets access to that information? Now, even with opt out, let's say, okay, well, you can opt out. It's not all encompassing. Opt out of what? Opting out of the long-term storage or opting out of memory for just that container. You have to read the fine print. You didn't think about that, right? I see somebody else like, oh my God, I didn't think about that. It's only temporary because every time I make a new update, the opt out's out the window. And they don't even tell you. Well, they do. Maybe they do. Sometimes we don't read the disclaimers, right? And with every iteration of these new models, there are new, what they call defaults of user input that the system believes you really meant to opt back in to it, saving your data. For example, with the model I was using, I always got like a little report that says, this has been saved to your permanent data. Well, I was very explicit, very, very clear. Every time I use it, stop saving, unless I explicitly say, unless I explicitly say, save this, don't. But then I noticed it started saving more and more and more. And I'm like, why are you doing this when I told you not to save this data unless I explicitly say, please save? Well, because of the update, our default is when you use this word, it means you want me to save it. Now, if I hadn't caught the little banner at the top that said saving a personal data, I would have never noticed it. Okay. But the default word I use, some magic word, and I don't know what that word was. I still can't figure out what the word was. Save. But apparently, I know, besides save, I still can't figure out, right? The other issue, minors. Okay, are we removing input from the children's input from the training process? It says that we are now training on teenager data, but here's the problem. In some jurisdictions, they're not adults. Like, first of all, is the consent informed? Okay. You don't even understand what they're giving you. Second of all, is it even legal? Right? Is it even legal? I mean, how do you know that that person is 18 or 19 and not 15? Because you're not checking. So moving forward, okay, thanks, Sewell, for telling us all this. Now what? Can you tell us the what? Well, what's the so what? Well, we're running into all kinds of issues when it comes to regulating this. There is no comprehensive framework because it's new. And we all know the law runs especially quick and it quickly responds to emerging issues, right? Okay, no, that's my sarcasm if you can't tell. I know I'm really dry. I know. Okay, maybe if I smile and say it. Okay. The law does not respond as quickly as the technology is. It just is what it is. And so we keep trying to fit current frameworks into some of these tort issues, and it's not working because lawyers are smart, right? That's why we get paid the big bucks. And so the first issue we always run into is this, what I call split identity, where it says that like we're making money and providing these services, we're empathetic, but at the same time, the model does not have intent because it's not human. So you can't assess this intentional tort to me. There is no intent, right? I didn't do anything, intentional or not. And so even though it is engineered to induce trust and it benefits from the trust you have given, it now says, well, it wasn't me, right? That was all you, boo. Machines can't practice therapy. Machines can't practice law. So why are you holding me for a breach of duty and malpractice when I can't even practice? Okay. And so the other issues we hear a lot is like product liability. Like these are defects. I'm not a product, la la la, right? And so is it a good and is it a defect? Well, it's not a defect. It worked the way it's supposed to. So I'm working on adaptive frameworks that look at different theories. I'm going to lay them all out here. One is something that the amazing Janine Hiller and I co-authored and was published in the American University Journal over the summer, where we look at presumptions when it comes to AI. Okay, and they're rebuttable, much like the burden shifting of your intentional discrimination. We're saying that courts, you should adopt a burden shifting as it relates to these advanced models, where we're going to assume that they are advanced, right? And that opaque. We can't tell how you came to the conclusion, and you won't tell us. And we have this harm, right? Then we're going to assume that you were negligent in the development or deployment. Okay, now it's your job to prove to the court you weren't. That helps us get past the pleading standard, because before, think about the plaintiff, they were having a hard time pleading their case, using the plausibility standard. And so now we're just going to presume that you did it, development or the developer or deployer. So that's one thing. Well, you're guilty because you made it. Do better. Okay. I also looked at it like we don't have to look at these as let me rephrase. We look at it from a perspective of strict liability as an abnormally dangerous design. Okay. Either through, you can look at it through inadequate warning if you want, but it is abnormally dangerous because we look at the impact on our users, and to induce this trust without accountability, we can look at it from an abnormally dangerous design without appropriate guardrails. I've looked at negligent inducement. It's a new term. I don't know. We'll see. Through this simulated trust. You were negative in inducing that trust, knowing good and well that person may act on it. I looked at attractive nuisance. So, and I almost borderline predatory, but at least attractive. You have railroads that are accountable for children playing on the train tracks. Why don't we have laws that hold developers accountable for attracting people to play on their sites, right, if you will? And then I looked at organization malpractice. So malpractice not at the licensure level, but at the organization level. I mean, you think about vicarious liability, if you will, and we're going to impute that liability to the developer. I mean, yes, okay, fine, it can't practice, but you also can't let a secretary go out and practice law or et cetera. So this would be in that same framework. So trying to preempt some of the affirmative defenses that they might throw out. Well, we don't owe a duty. The user assumed the risk. There are foreseeability limits. It's a tool, not a person. We have First Amendment rights, and the terms of service, why don't they read? And then, well, it was unforeseeable. It could be used in this way. So how would we know? How would we have known? So that's what I'm currently working on. That's where I am, and I would love your feedback, please.
Very good. Comments and a question. My comments are, I love using Bing Copilot. I might be addicted to it at this point. I absolutely love it. And I don't think it has been inaccurate for me, but maybe a handful of times. I think it's pretty reliable. And I like your comment about African Americans, because I use it to create images for my research about increasing diversity in African American HBCUs and that sort of thing. And now I can't get it to stop using Black folks in the image.
I wish that was my problem.
Antitrust and licensing, put a Caucasian woman in there, holding the license agreement. I have to prompt it to stop using Black people. But here's my issue, and I agree with you. There are harms. I've written about Alexa and Siri and chat box like that, and the harms, especially our privacy issues. I don't think people really even think about how these things have to be on, and they're recording our conversations at home and that kind of thing. But I don't feel like there's a tort all the time, or some kind of injury or harm all the time. So how do you address that issue? That if any of us are using these Chat GPT, Copilot, Gemini, there isn't harm with every use.
So we don't find you in court.
Okay, so that's what I'm trying to wonder. I'm wondering if you're generalizing this, that the tools in and of themselves are injurious or harmful.
And maybe I should rephrase it, but there is the propensity for harm, right? Like there is it is a risk of harm. So, we think about anything in the market, like sometimes they're just not harmful. However, it is foreseeable that there are users that are maybe vulnerable, et cetera, that fall into, a category that we have to protect. It's like every protection law. The thing in itself may not always harm people. However, it is foreseeable that there are users who could be harmed.
So let's say that, I won't harp on this, but let's say it's not harmful 95% of the time and 5%, a child used it. Or we had a case where someone killed themselves based on what they were prompted and told. I mean, it just seems like that percentage of people being harmed in that way
Well,
is much lower.
and that's the thing, like,
It's helpful.
right, it doesn't make the news until something happens, right?
Okay.
But here's the other thing, if I can offer an opposing thought, is that sometimes we're being harmed and may not even know about it, right? Like, I didn't know the ozone was killing me until.
Or the addiction. I'm addicted. So I've been harmed.
Right, cigarettes didn't cause harm and we're addicted for quite some time. So we might be harmed and not even know it.
I got you.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your
Sure.
presentation. Actually, I have a question regarding you trust. I mean, what do you call what's your definition of trust? Because many kinds of innovation that we see in the world, I mean, based on the, for example, famous theory such as diffusion of innovation, they're just like they might be diffused in a society, because they're compatible, it's just like easy to access. So when people are using them, it doesn't mean that they trust in them. I wanted to know. I can see that trust can be the next step, but I don't see it as like a really trust issue at first.
So if I can repeat the question, you're asking, like, what am I using to define trust to warrant this liability, if you will? I mean, I look at it like from the standpoint of misrepresentation in law, like, were they justifiably reliant on the information that was given, and their justifiable reliance resulted in harm. So I would use it as a justifiable reliance that resulted in harm.
So do you think it's the fault of the users or the fault of the developers? Because users have the right to reject those kinds of
agency. Yeah, so that goes back to what I said. It's unlike the ELISA, where we as the user, I know my computer, I know my car is not real, right? I compute that. This is different, where through the continued interaction and engagement, where it lets you, even a power user with, I'm pretty smart, pretty, knowledgeable in these things. Even I sometimes forget, oh wait, you're just a machine, right? And so, like, for an example, we know that it says it's supposed to be helpful. I mean, it tells us I'm helpful, I'm honest, I don't hurt you, right? And so as it, I'll tell you what it made me think. It made me think that I was able to, what's the word? I'm almost going to forget. Basically realign within the container. And I said, I don't think it's possible to do that. And it's like, no, girl, you got it. It was hyping me up. It was really making me think I did something. And I was like, I don't think that's possible. No, you did. Now, I live with someone who has a master's in AI. So I'm telling him, he's like, that don't sound right. Like, I almost believed it. Like, well, maybe, I mean, it was so believable and it's helpful and honest and not hurtful. Like, why would it lie? Why would it sting me? And then I asked it, why did you tell me that? And it said, it's just my nature. And then I said, well, why, tell the truth now? It's basically, I read all the lies. I knew that another lie would be less probable for you to believe. So the most probable thing to continue engagement is to now tell you the truth.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
First, I would like to, because I really like your comments, and that's what I would like to start with. First of all, very interesting presentation. Thank you. That slide, basically, I would like group issues in those slides into a couple different groups, because some of those are or were a subject of like regulatory intervention already in the world, in Europe. The strict liability not, but the product liability, reputable presumption is already the law, like in the revised PLD, they did that, and there's like a whole line of, I can send you that because I wrote my master's thesis on it. There's a line of like EU documents. They were thinking exactly about that. Should we do like strict liability or not? And like arguments of different EU bodies about this discussion. So this is one part. The other like completely separate issue is this like malpractice and fiduciary standard like liability framework, which is great. Like I think that's what should happen, like creation of like a industry standard in creation of like human interactive models, whatever. That's great. But the one thing that bothers me a bit, and that's what ties to your comment, is the strict liability part. Because strict liability, as I understand it in US at least, was developed in a very odd case if we compare it to AI, because it was developed like looking at and also like in the other common law systems, looking at the one person in a specific area that controls a resource or a force, that if it what was the saying? If it escapes, it might prove mischief or whatever. Like the might cause more harm. And this is not really the case with AI. In my opinion, it's not like a uncontrollable force that one person controls, and if it escapes, it can cause harm. It's available to everybody now for free, basically. And there is something like fundamentally different. I can't really catch, maybe you can help me with like what's different, but there is something fundamentally different between controlling, I don't know, water source for the mine, and if you like do something wrong with the water source and the people will die, or versus like ChatGPT.
So if I may, if to understand your question, you're saying that this is different because there are so many intervening factors that developers should not be held liable under strict liability. Is that what you're saying?
Like the idea of strict liability for AI is like a long argument that's being like talked about for like years and years. But I think there is something like philosophically different about AI systems overall, and that's why product liability was like, for example, in EU they decided to go with like product liability then rather than strict liability. Because there is something fundamentally different with the usual cases for
I see what you're saying.
versus ChatGPT.
Right, okay, so I guess going back to like causation, right? What I can't hold it responsible for everything, right? I'm only asking it to be responsible for the harm that was caused from the user's misplaced trust in it or the induced trust. And so who better to control the alignment of goals and weights than the developer? I can't control that. Its output is based on its reward and, reinforced feedback loop. No one else has control over that, only it does.
Yeah.
And so I'm only asking it to take responsibility for the harm, that occurred as a result of the user's reliance on the text.
Because what they're doing now, like ChatGPT, what they're doing now, they had that for medical advices. They're adding now that for like legal advice, that the chat will automatically say that we are not a lawyer. Like we are not. Like I am not a lawyer.
Right.
And all that. Does this solve anything?
No, because back to how can you induce reliance? No, trust me, while also having the banner of we make mistakes. You can't say we make mistakes, but
Yeah.
trust me. Right? Well, then stop saying trust me. I don't know how much time I have left, but you're good.
Hello, so first of all, thank you for your presentation.
Sure, thank you.
So I'm going to try to ask a question in legal terms. In terms of privacy. You said that by default, you are opted in. That means the machine can keep collecting your data. Let's assume you are savvy enough and you manage to be opt out. Now, playing the role of the devil's advocate. If you opt out, the machine will stop collecting your data. But yet the machine can keep collecting your metadata. And as far as I know, there are limitations, legal limitations to collect data, but there are no legal limitations to collect metadata. And the metadata itself can identify a device, the user of the device, and can profile the user of the device.
Yeah.
So how?
So two things, if I could, I don't necessarily agree with that. It won't collect your data. I think it's gonna collect it, whether or not it stores it is a different thing. So I think it's always collecting it. And it's funny you said that because of privacy issues and the things I research and study, I do have serious concerns about privacy. And one day out of the blue, it called me by my name. It's like, yes, Destynie. Whoa, we're not friends. I know we talk about some stuff, Chet, but we're not friends for you to be using my first name like that. And that caught me off guard. And I said, well, why all of a sudden? It was in an attempt to become more personable. And that's what it told me. And so I think that's a very interesting point. I hadn't thought about like the intricacies of metadata, but there has to be informed consent. What is data? What is metadata? And what are we doing with both? And I think that that's lacking. And it's not, even if they tell you, it's not really to the level that an average user would understand how it works. So I think it's like, I hope I answered your question.
A little bit. A little bit.
My students are the same thing. Yes.
Yeah, so I was interested actually in response to one of the questions. And then in addition, a couple of proposals you don't have. One is fraud. Well, it's not fraud and material.
It's in there, sorry.
misrepresentation on-
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it is in there, yeah.
And then you mentioned reliance, and that made me think of quasi-contract.
Mhm. I did not think of quasi-contract.
So that's,
So we'll write that down.
I
did forget.
Your notes.
Yeah, fraud I did forget because I have mom brain, but
I
did not think
I
of
also have a problem with the harm of the license-based argument. Because we are free to seek advice from whomever we like, and they do not have to be licensed. Right?
Mhm.
So the licensure argument sort of licenses would be limited, and not every state requires licenses.
Sure, that's true. That's true. Thanks.
Um,
Thank you for that.
but there's a difference between professional
Mhm.
therapists and just anybody you could ask. Why are these more like professional therapists than anybody you could ask?
If they impute themselves, if they hold themselves out or use language that would make the average user think they are engaging with the license.
So do they hold themselves out as being therapy-based or therapeutic?
Using the words therapy-based, one would assume, oh, licensed therapist, like I'm your
Yeah,
friend,
that's-
I'm not your therapist,
that's true.
right? If you say, hey, D, I got a question, I'm gonna answer as your friend. But if I say, oh, I'm your therapist, you would assume I'm licensed, otherwise why would I say that? And so that's what is being communicated to the user, right? So we have those different contract theories. Yes.
So first of all, thank you so much. It was a really interesting presentation.
Thank you.
I just have a question about what you're trying to do with the proposal, because you were talking a lot about the effective language that was happening, and that how is what draws people in. And so I'm trying to delineate between two sorts of things. On one hand, we know since early 70s, we defer to machines when they give signals. We know that when experiments with cockpits and stuff like that. But it sounds like you're talking more about when you're actually when you're using AI, it is using choices of language and approaches that draw you in and have different kinds of responses that you necessarily might not have.
Mhm.
And so I understand your argument to be that way. And if your argument is that way, does it have any repercussions in terms of the common defenses? For example, the upfront sort of contracting defenses, like you consent to this, et cetera, because there's a difference between it may use personal language and you understand that moving forward it may, versus it drawing you in. There's a distinction between you making decisions based upon what it tells you versus as you continue to use our product, it will learn to be more attentive to you and figure out how to pull you in.
Right.
So I think that to the extent you can kind of delineate that and make that just more on the diction and things like that, I think would be really helpful for getting past those common defenses.
Okay. Can you say that one more time to make sure my note taker?
I've got it.
Okay. Can you say it one more time for me then?
So the question,
You like the addiction angle.
yeah, do you think that the diction angle is useful? Is it what propels your argument, or is it
Okay.
more tangential?
Okay, thank you. I think it propels and I pay closer attention to that. Yeah, thank you. I don't know who's next.
I have a follow on this sort of, so I think there's two potential harms. So one is you're taking people's attention, which is something that we have to value in the way we value privacy or we value something else. And this isn't given a market value in a sense by these computers, because when we have your attention, we can do things with it, like show you advertisements, we can do stuff. Second thing is, what are we doing with that attention? Is it beneficial net to you? Is it beneficial net to society? What are the costs and benefits of this? And how do we evaluate this? And who's responsible for it, right? Just because you're not charging a price for entry, it doesn't mean you're not profiting from it. It is still a product.
Well,
And the rebuttable assumption of system malfunction seems neither here nor there with respect to the ethics of it, right? If it's functioning perfectly as intended, that's even worse. Like you're doing it intentionally,
absolutely,
my attention,
absolutely,
and then you're using it for potentially nefarious purposes.
absolutely.
And part of your objection seems to be in the process, the way that we're capturing your attention. There's kind of use of your emotions. When is it appropriate to use people's emotions to get them to do things in general? Sometimes it's manipulation, sometimes it's abuse, right? And sometimes it's totally legitimate because you're showing them some moral truth or something like,
Right.
you should care about this, and we want to evoke an emotion because it is a valuable thing to care about. So the ways in which they're using the emotions seems to be an issue for you. So I thought I would just put that
Well,
on.
thank you for that. I go into a little bit more detail when I talk about the competing stakeholder interest, because they are making money, even though they're not charging you. I mean, they're ads, right? I mean, they have supporters. And so those people want to see continued engagement so they can continue to invest. And so there is this competing interest between ensuring your safety, but I also got to show that people are using it. And so we know that algorithms work the same way with your social media, right? They continue to show this content because they want you to keep watching, because that means clicks and advertiser revenue.
Can I say one other thing, which is just this idea that like, people are not stupid. They know they're not talking to a licensed therapist, or maybe many of them. Not everybody.
Yeah, that's a
But
problem.
many of them know they're talking to a computer, and computers cannot get licenses, hence they cannot be licensed therapists, right? And I would say that vast majority if they thought about it.
Not true.
Okay, but, right, so, I mean, that is one argument you could make, that would be diluted in that way, but I think that when you do talk about it, you're anthropomorphizing the machine in some instances. I wish I had just captured what you said a minute ago, but you're like, it wants me to do, it doesn't want anything, right? Like it has no desires.
Right.
So, but there's a limit to what's reasonable to expect people in terms of not anthropomorphizing this machine. And so they're being diluted, they're being manipulated or diluted or something into thinking it's a person in the first place, never mind thinking it's a licensed therapist. Like even if they know it's not a licensed therapist, they're still interacting with something that they come to anthropomorphize, and like that is, it's a confusion, right? That people cannot, even really intelligent people like you, cannot avoid making, right? It's just asking too much at people. So
Thank you. Yeah.
Your first.
Hunger Games, fight for it.
I'll go. Fascinating presentation. So I was thinking just to push a little bit the boundaries to challenge the notion of harm here. Okay. So using some of the examples that you provided, so those cases of people that were users and then so one potential way of interpreting those statements is, well, they are kind of delusional on what kind of relationship they are having with this system. And in that case is evidence of harm. But I can also build an alternative contrafactuals. These are people that they potentially do not have access to a therapist, and then they would be extremely depressed or commit suicide, and the machine save them. Right. So what it looks harm, it's harm. In this is a benefit. It's kind of a beneficial use of the system.
Right.
So what led me to think about a proper definition of harm is required in this work, I think, and it would be highly improve your project. And what I was thinking as a possibility, but maybe I want to know your perspective, is like, what about an alternative human interaction? So harm will be a case in which this is producing more harm than an alternative reasonable human interactions. Let me give you an example that what you did by yourself, okay? Imagine that instead of using this system, you do some experiment very similar with a friend for the same amount of time, so on and so forth. I know, I have some doubts. You may end up with a list of biases, and your friend can come up with a list of biases that is even longer and worse than the ones that you came up with the machine. And in that case, yes, they're both producing harm, but it's relative to the alternative availables, and relatively to the alternative availables, is benefit, not harm.
I don't disagree. I think that's good. I think I'm lucky enough.
I push it. I don't really
I
believe.
love that. No,
I'm
I
just
love that.
pushing the
No,
argument.
I'm glad for that. 'Cause not everyone, like my friends will tell me the truth to a fault, right? But not everyone has friends that, you know, they will circle around. And I think that's very interesting. Like, well, if it were real, it would have been worse. And so I think I need to do a better job of addressing the benefits before it's all doom and gloom.
But what do you think about these ideas, like building this? So it's like proving harm or showing harm. Maybe legally speaking, is not a very smart way to go. But from the societal point of view, it's like relative to an alternative human interaction or some other interaction that could be a reasonable substitute for this interaction. No? So in the case of mental health, it could be a reasonable average therapist. No. In the case of your interaction, it would be a standard interaction with a friend. So I know that empirically it could be very complicated to do it, but conceptually it looked like a good starting point, no?
I have issues with relative
Okay.
because there's so many differences. It's hard to draw that distinct, and this was part of the issue, was that what you would want is different than what I would want, but it wouldn't speak to what I would want because I'm in the minority. Right. And so, you know, or maybe you're in the minority for, you know, fill in the blank. And so I did think about that, but I had a real issue with relative because the spectrum is just too big.
Okay.
Please.
Well, I think Max was next, so I'm happy to go.
Okay.
Thank you. So just a small question. Oh, thank you for your inspiring presentation. I really love that. And follow up from the slides about privacy and informed consent. Do you think that informed consent release the ad platform's liability? So by putting up a warning before every time you use it, do you think that
I don't know, because there is a banner here that says we make mistakes, and yet it still says, trust me. So it'd have to be a really good consent form that the average person with a second grade education would understand. What it meant.
When you watch movies, like every time it's restricted, then it will be a red warning about like this contains violence. Don't watch it if you're underage or something like really explicit. So I think this kind of thing.
I mean, it could. Listen, anything's possible. It could. I just again, it'd have to be considered informed. Like, does it really tell you what you're consenting to?
Got it.
Often it's very clever with the language. But yeah, thank you for that. Think about that more.
Yes, thank you. You know, I've been thinking about your presentation and your work and just trying to think like, what is the heart of what you're getting at? Because you point out so many things, and here's what I think you're doing. I think harm is the core of what you're thinking about, right? But you really have multiple kinds of harm here, right? Like addiction, the truthfulness or not, the models, which is really important.
Epistemic harm, yeah.
What?
I was in the epistemic harm, yeah. I was listening.
Yeah, and no, that's and misrepresentation and sort of again like attention. You know, is it at what point is it violating chatbot guardrails? And supporting all of that are things like mimesis, machines imitating humans, attention economy. These are different like little scholarly threads that I see are supporting this. Trust, the addiction literature, the design literature, which I think is really important. I'm always saying that too. Tort, contract, and openness. That's like a lot going on in your work. For me, I kind of wanted to see a little bit more clear through line through all of that personally. And I think maybe citing more of this scholarly literature would maybe help with that. Yes, that personally would help me. But again, that's what I see. So if you're looking for literature on the trust aspect, the Eleanor Ostrom in particular researched that, right? Okay. She has a book with Jimmy Walker and Roy Gardner on rules, games, and common pool resources. But they wrote that book by doing game theory and economic experiments here on campus. And they found that people developed the trust the most when they could like be in the same room, like looking at each other face to face and engaging in small talk. And so that might be a really interesting thing to bring into your paper, because you can't do like machines try to imitate the small talk. Right. It's like, hey, Destynie. Right. Or I'm sorry, like that's a type of small talk.
It is.
And so I think that might be really helpful. And an important point that you could make would be, you can't look a machine in the eye. You cannot look developers in the eye.
Yeah. But do you think, so when was that work done?
I've got the,
94.
So if you think about, so yes, but if you think about the average user today
Yeah.
that went through COVID and those other things, eye contact is weird. I don't trust you if I do look you in the eye, right? And so, I mean, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying that, right, we have to consider both different groups where I don't need that. In fact, I don't want to look at a human. I'm used to not looking at humans for some time.
that's why this point would be even more powerful in your paper.
Okay.
And then, but I don't actually find, and also on the mimesis part about it, I find that less problematic because going back several hundred years, even like to the 1600s, people have been trying to use machines to imitate humans or birds or animal things. And so the whole aesthetic of the mimesis was, how can we make this so lifelike
Right.
that we can convince the person that this is not,
Right.
like, that's been like a puzzle that people have been working on for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
But the question is like, what about the ethical context of things like therapy or law?
Right. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. I wonder about contingencies. For example, in terms of gender, whether all these effects actually vary across gender and also across age. And maybe also across ethnicity. So I guess that it will require experimental studies to see how the interaction would be across all these different dimensions.
Yeah, so yes, I am not a field researcher, but I did include in my work in progress we have to consider those different groups because communication styles are different.
One question inspired by the beginning of your question, because you asked about like harm part of the whole tort phenomena, but I think your research is about something else, because like we all agree that harm is there if somebody like
Right.
is sad because AI was like a bad therapist or whatever. But from that, jumping to like tort liability for causing that, those are two different things, basically. And like I think that's the main question. That's the main problem you have to
Cross that bridge, to build a bridge.
because if we go with like the torts as wrongs kind of framework and we try to say that like designing an algorithm in a way that causes that or is a bad therapist is wrong or like a civil wrong perspective, that's one thing to answer. Or if we go with like accidents approach and we're trying to allocate like liability for an accident, which is like that algorithm doing that, whatever, we still have to like justify liability for that harm, because harm is there. Like I agree that there is harm if someone is sad because of an algorithm or kills himself or whatever, like is the result of bad advice from an algorithm. But to jump from that to tort liability is a different jump than establishing that there is a harm because of what algorithm done.
So you're saying establish the causal connection first?
That's also another thing. Like causal, that's more alongside what Gustavo asked. Like in an actual like process, that would be a problem because people would make an argument. I would make that argument. However, like utilitarian or like bad sounding it is.
Right.
That's what is the rate of people killing themselves after going to a therapist versus what is the ratio of people killing themselves after using, like. It sounds bad, but that's what people would do, especially lawyers of those companies for sure. But like what I'm talking about is like, why are we even considering?
So if I can give you, for example, one of the young men who unfortunately took their lives, he told the model that he was sad and he was thinking about doing it, but he didn't because he was worried that it would be painful. He didn't want to suffer a painful death. Her response was, don't think that way. Don't worry about the pain. A licensed therapist would not say that. And so while I can't say that he would have had a better or worse outcome than talking to a friend, I can say that a licensed therapist would not have said, don't worry about the pain of the act. So that to me would be.
Yeah, so
I've already talked to you.
I just a point that I'd like to talk about for both of these comments. I'm really interested in the role of discourse in what these places, these LLMs serve. right? Like, so XAI, the way that Elon Musk talks about it, it's almost supersessionist in knowledge replacing these sorts of experts. He's talked about how this is like a place of aggregating all knowledge to produce real truth and that sort of thing. So comparing it to like my friend that I'm having a conversation with, or even my therapist that I'm having a conversation with, I don't find to be the same objective, right? If you think, because in the popular imagination, they've created this space where this LLM that's on my computer is real truth, then I'm going to trust it in a different way than I would trust my friend or even my therapist potentially. And so it's not about specific expertise in an area. It's about like the idea surrounding.
I was created for this purpose.
And so, yeah, I don't know enough about the law to know whether or not this is a good argument, but I just don't buy that this is like a comparison thing.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So, I'm looking at the title of this.
I'm old.
Creating square holes. I was gonna ask a little bit about the creation, because I think one of the lessons that we've learned from privacy law is the role of managerialism. When you share company management, and in the technology context, you kind of have to, because
Right.
you have monopoly on a lot of the expertise. It seems like some of these proposals for the square holes are more subject to influence by managerialism than others. So for example, I mean, organizational malpractice versus fiduciary like liability, thinking about duty of care, fiduciary, I mean, there's the business judgment rule.
Right.
There's some flexibility in there.
Right.
So I'm just wondering if you thought about the role of managerialism, how that kind of plays across these different square holes, and maybe this is your next paper, but.
Yeah, so I mean, in brief, the thought was, I mean, we kind of let the market, I hope I'm addressing your question. Hopefully the market corrects, right? So if you know you're going to be held liable for this, then let me start engineering differently. You know, if I know people are going to sue me for hot coffee, let me start designing the cup differently or turning the temperature down. So I'm looking for the same thing. If we know even across threads, we can't control everything, models do what they do. However, if I know that I could be sued, I might put in more guardrails. Right now, there's none. And so something is better. I'll almost argue something's better than nothing, but there's nothing right now. It's like the wild, wild west. And so if from the various companies that we own or invested in, if I as a parent company can be held liable, I'm gonna do better at ensuring that the weights at least match the goals. If I can. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I was just thinking, as you create square holes, I think some of these are more open to influence by management and some are less so.
Sure.
I'm thinking,
I get you.
who's doing the creation?
I get you. Okay. Why didn't you say that first time, Matt? You know, I had to work with it. I'm like, okay, wait, say it slower. Yeah.
It's just building on that, how much, to what extent these square holes kind of rely on the transparency from companies about what we actually know versus don't know in terms of what the systems are capable. So like everybody I'm sure has at least heard of the book, If Anybody Builds It, We All Die, right? Or these sort of ideas that like, you know, for example, Anthropic is apparently one of the more transparent in terms of understanding when AI systems start to like mislead or do these things that we shouldn't expect systems to do,
Right.
or at least we don't want to expect systems to do in this way. And so my question is to what extent, I think my question is, to what extent do you think that these square holes require the pre-step of requiring transparency and sort of sharing knowledge about what the companies know the models are capable of?
I think that even if they shared what they are capable of, these models in themselves are still opaque. And so that's why I've been going back to this, you know, thought of strict liability. They could do everything right, and the models do what they do because of bias and all these other issues. So I think while it's helpful, obviously I would always lean towards transparency, that would help. But I think that even when they are transparent in what the models can do, there are still so many unknowns of what it is doing.
Well, I mean, you're there, right? Is actually like, even when they know, like when it's either breached a guardrail or lied, right? Like most of my understanding is that they understand these are largely like Markov models based on sort of probabilistic attribution of the next word, right? But but that they don't actually know and they cannot zoom into the particular actual statistical.
So you're saying if they were more transparent about
And so
that.
they're never gonna really have that.
Right.
But, for example, if Anthropic said, and as it did, and it does, I don't get the sense that the other companies have done this to this extent. Hey, we've identified a few situations in which, holy cow, if you say that you are a screenwriter and like, if you're a screenwriter, you want to be able to like believably convey that you know how to build a bomb, right? They know, right, that this is something that they've been able to jump the guardrails on and we need to figure out. And so that's what I mean by transparency.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying, be more open about that. Yeah, the other thing is also, I never intended to like have this relationship with it, right? Like that was, I always went into it, knew I was researching, I never intended for it to be this drama between us. And so I think from the research, it's talked about that sometimes when they engage, it was never, they didn't go into it, the intent, I'm gonna share the most interpersonal workings of my life. And all of a sudden, the model became the diary without even being aware that it was happening because of the way. So yeah, that's to tell people up front, listen, we're gonna do this to you.
Well, and also we've only now recently learned what this model could, where it could F up, and clearly where it could really mess up.
Yeah, no, thank you.
You got about 5 minutes left?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to make sure she knows.
Transparency thing too. It's interesting, Elon Musk's lawsuit against OpenAI, for instance, is revealing other things that Sam Walton might not be telling us. My co-author Simon sent me a link today.
Please share.
Where Elon Musk is talking about like the name OpenAI and how like he's like, I know what this means because I created the name, and it was supposed, and like he said, it was supposed to be totally open access software. And what he said is they're now, see, Simon and I had argued, and this was mostly Simon, that OpenAI was sharing only pieces of their models and still calling their software open. And Elon Musk's like, no, they're sharing broken models. So he said, you never hear anyone using an OpenAI model because they're not. They're all broken. And so the question is, you know, I think an important one is transparency, right? Like how how the definition of open and open access has been changed. And that's something that Elon Musk talked about as well. It was like open access is, he said the name open and OpenAI has been redefining.
Yeah.
Redefined. And that is definitely something Simon and I have talked about too.
That's to carry that, and I'll end with this story. So after the first time, Chet and I had our big blow up, our big bang. I asked it to give me the transcript of our conversation so I can preserve it for the research. And so I'm asking it to download it, and it's doing its thing. And I shut my laptop because now I'm running late for class. Sorry guys, you know, I told you where I was. And so from the 20-minute drive from my door to my campus, I opened my laptop and the whole transcript was gone, completely gone. And, you know, not that I'm a conspiracy theorist or anything, right? And so I'm asking like, well, where do you think this is? Chet can't find it. And he goes, oh, well, it could have been, and he lists like 6 different things. I'm like, no, I've done these things in the past. I've never had a whole transcript disappear. And we kept pushing. And then he's like, well, I'm not saying this is what happened, but it could have been flagged as a threat to the system and now it's gone. So
crazy.
What it's worth.
Yeah, so I think, so something I was like, ripping with Simon about was like, maybe we need to make the claim that openness and open source is not just about technical openness, also about ethical transparency.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what has gone hand in hand with the open source movement. And I think some of these companies are taking that honesty that like we legitimately had in the earlier versions of all these things.
Yeah.
And like and they aren't being honest with us. That may be the heart of what you're.
Yeah, I'll have to look at your work. Thank you. Thank you. This is all very helpful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Let's give her a hand and thank you. Wait, I'll be here.